My name is Barbara Howe. I'm an instructor at the University of South Florida. I teach INR 2002, Introduction to International Relations. And this is a little video I've made for my students who are reading a very difficult article this week. It's by G. John Ikenberry, and it's called The End of the Liberal International Order, with a question mark at the end, because that's the question he's trying to answer. The article was written in 2018, and it's pretty straightforward. It's not very jargony. It's a pretty straightforward article in terms of the language, but the argument itself is quite complex, and it is also a multi-part argument. So a lot of my students, it's the first time you're encountering an academic article, and we're reading 3 of them this semester, and these are not very easy. Especially, you cannot expect to be able to get it on your first read through. Like I've said to some of you, this is about the 5th or 6th time I've read this article. I think it might be my first time teaching it. I think I haven't used this article before. But I'm very, very familiar with this article. And I'm still just now getting to the point where I feel like, yeah, I think I can articulate the main argument that he has here. And so this took me a while to get to this point. So all of that is just to say, don't expect, yourself to be able to read through this article once, one evening, an hour, you're done, and then just be able to write a perfect analysis paragraph. That is not going to happen. So if you had any expectation about that, throw it out the window. Don't be too hard on yourself. If you read this through and you're like, I have no idea what this guy is saying, other than generally, he thinks that the liberal world order is not ending. And other than that, I can't tell what he's saying. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Like I've said, I've given y'all more time to read these articles, and we're going to revisit them. I think what we're going to do is go ahead to the next week. We're going to go on to the 3rd and final article for our annotated bibliographies, and we're going to leave this one behind, but we will come back to it. So if you haven't had a chance to read it or finish it, or especially if you need to read it again, which all of you do, we all need to read this article again because it's not easy. Then you will have time to do that. So what I'm going to do now, though, is for those of you who want this, hopefully this will be a helpful little video to kind of walk you through the argument so you can see some of the main things that that he's claiming, some of his key propositions, some evidence that he offers to support those propositions, and then most importantly, what his conclusions are. So I just read through the article again myself for like the 7th time, and I wrote this little PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen, and we want to share just the PowerPoint screen. Let's see if we're getting that. It's coming up in a second. It's thinking about it. And it's going to start at the beginning, and I put mine at the end. So let me go through all of these really quickly. Don't worry, it's not 47 slides long. I just put it at the end of the slides for this week. So let me go ahead and advance to that point. Okay, yeah, we're talking about liberalism. We've talked about the Enlightenment, the 5 influential ideas from the Enlightenment, how that traces back to Kant and Locke. This was my little intro about the article from last week, but I have this all laid out earlier here. Going there, that's a useful slide graph about the numbers of democracies. Here we go. Okay, this is where we're going to begin. A brief walkthrough of Ikenberry's argument in the 2018 article, The End of the Liberal International Order, with a question mark on the end, because that's, gives you an idea. That's obviously the question that that he is answering. And you've all pretty much gotten that the motivating question that the author is trying to answer here is the liberal international order ending, or does it have a future? And we know that his answer is it does have a future. But do we know why that's his answer? That's the hard part. Why is that his answer? More specifically, what his answer to this question is, it has a future, but it must change and evolve. And what he means more specifically is that he argues that the Leo has a future if we do 2 things. 1, change how we think about it, redefine it, not think about liberal internationalism or the liberal world order as meaning only US hegemony, because that is declining. we need to think about it, he says, more broadly as a general rules-based way of interacting, way of states that states have of interacting with each other. He iterates this at various points throughout the article. He'll say something to the effect of liberal internationalism, and you notice he starts to use that term a little bit more instead of liberal world order, but liberal internationalism as being a broad set of guiding principles. And he often says it's a way of responding to modernity. What he means by that is just responding to the problems of the modern world, essentially. So if he says that's the first thing that we need to do is we need to rethink how we define liberal internationalism or the liberal world order as liberal internationalism. And the second thing that is less apparent, because he doesn't say this early on, but it becomes apparent later on in the second half of his article, the second thing we need to do is to rediscover this concept of embedded liberalism. And I'll say more about what he means by that later on in this video. I've already introduced it a bit in class, but I'll say more later on. He says that's a concept that we have of liberalism that we have lost in recent decades, and we need to bring that back. So that's the second part of his argument, of his answer to why he thinks the liberal world order is not ending. And then he ends the article by making the point that, you know, the liberal world order has to change. We have to do this. We have to reform how we think about it and rediscover embedded liberalism, because the alternatives to the liberal world order are not very good. Those alternatives are a world led by China or Russia. Both of these are closed authoritarian systems that don't translate well to a world order. They're not attractive ways of organizing the world or organizing how states interact with each other. Okay, so if those are the alternatives, we can see the importance of why we need to reform the liberal world order, change how we think about it. Okay, so going on, things to notice in the beginning as you're reading this article again for the second time. In the first paragraph, you notice he's defining what the liberal world order is. This is a general concept. In this case, this is a general concept that he is using, not inventing it. Other people use this concept all the time. It's not unique to him, and that's why you don't need to include it in your paragraph. He's just saying, this is what the liberal world order is. This is what I'm talking about here. And then the second paragraph, he says, this is what other people are saying about why that liberal world order is ending. So just to remember that that's not his argument. He's saying those other people are saying that it's ending for these reasons. And they, you know, they have reasons, they have evidence to back up why they say it's ending. But don't mistake that for his own argument. That's what he's arguing against. Okay, so you see that in the second paragraph. And then finally, he says later on I think I forget what paragraph it is, but later on he says his own concept of how to define the liberal world order, that is something you can define in your analysis paragraph. That would be key to saying, you know, this is one of his key propositions, is that first he said, this is how people have traditionally thought about the liberal world order. And the whole point of his article here is to say, we should think about it differently. Here's my proposition for how to think about liberal internationalism. Okay, so that's unique to him. That's his answer to the question. And so that's a key concept that's worth talking about or defining in your paragraphs. Otherwise, you know, you don't want to necessarily have to define every single key concept in the paragraph. Otherwise, your paragraphs are going to be way too long. And they're not necessary. The only key concepts you really need to define are the ones that are part of the author's answer to the question, something that is unique to them. That's what they're offering to the conversation. Okay, so secondly, here's some of the key propositions or concepts that he lays out. These are not all of them, but these are some of them, and I think these are the most important. Is that he argues that the LEO, the Liberal International Order, is more than just hegemony. It's a general and long-standing, I'm quoting here, general and long-standing set of ideas, principles, and political agendas for organizing and reforming international order. So that's his new definition of the LEO. He says that's how we need to think about it if we want it to survive. Some of the evidence that he uses to back this up is he cites the fact that the LEO is based in Enlightenment principles, which far, precede U.S. hegemony. And it has evolved over many iterations so far, and it has faced many other crises so far, such as, the crises of the world wars, the Great Depression, the Cold War. Liberalism has survived as a general organizing principle for the world through all of those things. So if it has done that, then it can survive the current crisis, he says. So that's the first proposition and some of the evidence. The second proposition that I think is super important, the second most important proposition that he makes in this article, is a complicated point about the nature of the current crisis. What he says is the nature of the current crisis is in the end of the Cold War. It's the end of the Cold War that has caused the current crisis. So what does that mean? For Ikenberry, he says what that means is that the end of the Cold War it's a crisis of success. It's a crisis of triumph. The liberalism triumphed in the end of the Cold War. So it's a crisis of success, not of failure. So what that means is that it's not that liberalism, he uses this as evidence to back up his claims. It's not that liberalism has failed because it failed to explain something about the world. It has actually succeeded. And the current crisis is a problem because it has succeeded too well, okay? Now that leads to another thing that he says that is a little bit difficult. And I don't care, this is a sort of relatively minor point. So I didn't explain it in class. I'm going to explain it here just so that I think it will help you understand that second proposition a little bit better. He says it's a Polanyi crisis, not an E.H. Carr crisis. What does that mean? Oh my gosh. Yeah. So this was not super accessible. I knew when I signed this article, I was like, they're not going to know what that means. He does give references to it. He references those two books. The reason why he doesn't explain it that much is because he knows his audience is familiar with both of those theorists. Those are famous IR theorists. And he does explain it a little bit, but I'm going to explain it a little bit more than he does because, you're undergraduate students, you're encountering this for the first time. You've never read Karl Polanyi. You have no idea who E.H. Carr is. That's totally fine. I'm going to tell you what he means by that. A Polanyi crisis, he means Karl Polanyi is an early 20th century writer who warned about the dangers of thinking about the market as completely separate from society, as if anything that happens in the market would not impact society, or it doesn't matter, that these things are totally separate. He warned there's danger in that. We need to think of the market as part of society. And that's what he means by like embedded. He doesn't use that term embedded, that comes later from John Ruggie, but the market is to be considered a part of society, and it works for society rather than the other way around, society working for the market. So the market should not be dictating our lives. The market should be used as a tool to make our lives better. And if it's not doing that, then governments should step in and regulate the market or take whatever steps necessary to ensure that society is healthy and thriving. Because if we don't do that, if we just let the market run roughshod over society, completely unregulated, then there's a huge social there's a huge social cost to doing that. Large numbers of people get left out, people are thrown into poverty. It turns into something like not a very attractive place for people to live. Nobody really wants to live in a society that's totally governed by the unregulated whims of the market, which dictates everything. That's not an attractive thing. So Karl Polanyi is the one who explained all of this. E.H. Carr, hold that thought about Polanyi for a minute. E.H. Carr was a realist, totally separate, also a 20th century guy, but he was an early 20th century realist who criticized Wilsonian idealism. And he said, Wilsonian idealism was wrong. It failed to explain great power politics, and it failed to explain why World War I happened. That was the problem. They said Wilsonian idealism, said the world works like this, and then World War I broke out, and that kind of proved it all wrong. So an E.H. Carr crisis is a crisis where, oh, it has failed to explain something about international politics. Ikenberry says what we have here right now, the liberal world order, is facing a Polanyi crisis, not an EH-Carr crisis. It's a crisis because we've lately, in the most recent decades, we've let the market run roughshod over society. And so that's how he begins to make his point, that we need to rein it back in. We need to have, once again, a market embedded within society. And the best example of that, of what that means, is basically the New Deal programs, also the Great Society programs. When Lyndon B. Johnson, started Social Security Administration, Medicaid, Medicare, stuff like that. These are government programs that take care of society. The market does not do those things. The things that the market does not do well, such as provide healthcare for everybody, the government should step in and do that. That's the idea behind the Great Society programs, New Deal programs. We should have an employment insurance, things to take care of people for when there are quote unquote market failures, right? So that hopefully clears that up. I just inserted here again my little slide on embedded liberalism. It's just that idea that the market is embedded within society. That term embedded, it comes from John Ruggie, so that came later. That's not Karl Polanyi's term, but I think Ruggie's term is easier to understand. That for me, that really helped explain that concept, is thinking of the market as part of society. He talks about in the old days where like the market literally was a location, like in Athens, the Agora. It was a specific location within the city. So yeah, that idea of the market embedded. So that's one thing that we've lost in recent decades and that has led to the current crisis. And that's what we need to bring back if we want to get past this current crisis. So all that brings us to his recommendations, which of course, these are more propositions, but his recommendations are basically, I put them into two categories. One, if you can see the slides here, it's pretty small. I have a lot of text on this slide. His first recommendation is, like I said before, it's about how we think about the liberal world order, not just as US hegemony. That's not a necessary part of liberalism. That's a feature that has defined the liberal world order since World War II, and it's declining now, it's going away, and that is okay, as long as we keep the other aspects of liberalism. And he argues that those are good aspects, and I agree, those are some of the assumptions, that these are good things. But that we think about liberalism, liberal world order, not as US hegemony, but as this broader set of guiding principles governing how states interact with each other, and defining how the world can respond to, the crisis of the modern world, such as now climate change, environmental degradation, weapons of mass destruction, pandemics, stuff like that. These are all problems of the modern world that states have to respond to. And he says liberalism offers a good guiding set of broad principles for how to respond to those things. Another point he makes that, again, is not super accessible, but it's not a huge point. It's a relatively minor point, but I'll explain what he means. He talks about that this can happen we can have two versions. We can either have a small and thick version of liberal internationalism, or we can have a large and thin version. And all that means is small and thick would mean like every country included would be a strong democracy, no partial democracies, no weakening democracies, no autocracies for sure, but everybody, that would be small and thick, lots of institutions, binding everyone together. That's one option. The other option would be to be more inclusive. Maybe not every state is a completely strong democracy. He would say nowadays, maybe we do still want to include India, even though India has gone through a lot of democratic backsliding recently. This is why I think we'll see, in today's politics of 2023, we see the US courting India, even though India is struggling a lot right now with a lot of Hindu nationalism. And this is having very negative consequences for the Muslim population in that country. So there's some very anti-democratic things going on in that country right now. Under this large and thick version, we still include that, because it's not about every country being super strong democracy. As long as generally we agree the international politics is a rules-based game that, it's not the might equals right, and big countries can invade little countries. That, that's a rules-based international order. And that generally countries are moving towards more democracy rather than less. That would be a large and thin version of that. It's a minor detail, but in case you were wondering what he meant by that, hopefully that helps clear that up. And then what I said, like his second recommendation here is that we rediscover that idea of embedded liberalism. He says, lately, neoliberal economic policies, these are policies in which advocate for unregulated markets, reduced social spending by governments. He said the problem with these is that they're not sustainable because they have such negative social effects. And then there's an interesting thing here. He cites the evidence for this is what he mentions this other theorist who has described the elephant curve. What the elephant curve is how the neoliberal economic policies have helped raise incomes for people in developing countries, lower and middle classes in developing countries. It has drastically raised incomes for them. But then the curve goes down for people in developed countries, working in middle classes in developing countries. They're benefiting less from neoliberal economic policies. And then once the other curve, the other high point that is benefiting is the top 0.01%, the owners of the multinational corporations and such that are benefiting. They have hugely increased incomes. So they're the top of the elephant's trunk lifted upward. Okay, so you have to think about the elephant with their trunk, lifted upward. So the top 0.01% is up here. They're benefiting a lot. The middle and lower classes in developing countries, they're not benefiting very much. But then we have another peak of, people, working classes in developing countries that are benefiting. That's great for them. The problem is it's not sustainable because these people down here in the developed countries that are working in middle classes, non-college educated workers, these workers need help. They're being left behind by these neoliberal economic policies. If we re-embed the economy, we build up social safety systems to protect them, to help them thrive in this economy, then the Leo has a future, liberal internationalism has a future. So those are his two recommendations. So it's important to know that there's two recommendations. One, we redefine how we think about liberal internationalism, but two, we also rediscover this lost concept of the embedded economy, embedded liberalism. That's the second part of his argument. Like I said, he doesn't say it earlier on in the article, that's what my conclusion is. He leaves that part and said it develops later on. So you don't see it in the first few pages. Some evidences I have listed here. You can look at these slides on your own. A lot of you found these, and that's great. These are some of the evidence. I don't claim that I've listed all of the evidence. You can find stuff in there and say, this is evidence. And if it makes sense, I'll be like, yeah, that's great, even though I don't have it listed here. So you may find something that you think is evidence that supports their proposition that I have not listed here. That's totally legitimate. That's great, actually. Hopefully you don't just copy my evidence, you find your own. But those are some just to give you an idea. Okay, so overall his conclusion is, like, I guess I've said this enough. We need to redefine how we think about what the liberal international order is. It's not just about US hegemony. He says the US must discover what made liberalism attractive in the first place. And that's that, having strong safety nets to protect society from the whims of the market. That's super, super important. And then he finally says, like, the reason why all this is super important is because the alternatives to a liberal world order are not very attractive. It's a world led by China or by Russia, and that would not be a pleasant world to live in. That's a world in which, strong countries invade weak countries, and authoritarianism is the norm instead of democracy. So that is not probably what any of us really want. And so if we don't want that, we're going to need to reform the liberal international order, change how we think about it, rediscover embedded liberalism. And that's basically John Ikenberry's argument in his 2018 article. So I hope that this helped. I'm going to stop the recording now or stop sharing first, and then Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to leave comments below. I'm not sure where I'm going to post this yet. I might post this on my YouTube channel. I might just post it in Canvas. But yeah, if you have any questions, just let me know. But I hope that helped walk through. Again, let me encourage you to please, please, please reread that article. If you only read the article once, if you only read the first 5 pages of the article, don't try to do that and think you can be able to write a good analysis. You just won't be able to write a good analysis paragraph if you just do that. So read the whole article and then read it through again. And I think you'll get it, and then you'll be really proud of yourself. And like I'm going to tell you on next week, the reason why this is so important, learning how to analyze an argument, is basically so you don't get duped by bad arguments. If you can analyze an argument, you can make good decisions as a citizen living in a democracy. And if we want to continue living in a democracy, the next generation of citizen voters, leaders, needs to be able to think on their own. You need to have good critical thinking skills. Okay, so it's so important. It's so important. Like literally nothing but the future of democracy depends on you developing good critical thinking skills. So I know this was hard. This was difficult. I'm not pretending that it's easy at all. So I am really proud of y'all for hanging in there. I think you're all doing really, really good. Okay, so let me just say that I have an amazing class this semester, and the vast, vast majority of you are doing really great. So do not worry. You're all, all right, so hang in there. I am going to end this video now. Hope you have a good weekend. Bye.